We're going to be talking tonight about how to choose the right plants. And to do that, I want to give you a little bit sort of background about the climate we live in, the area we live in, which helps you to make decisions about what you're going to grow and what you can find here. We're looking at a picture of Western Washington, a little topographical rendering showing where the bodies of water are, the major bodies of water, and then where our mountain ranges are. And this matters because this all mitigates the climate that we have in the areas we live. I live in North Delridge in West Seattle, so I have a little bit different climate than people living in Bothell, or anybody who lives up in Snoqualmie, or somebody that lives over in Copalis Beach. So these are all going to be very different from each other because we have a lot of microclimates in the western side of the state. So we're going to look at what you see on the left here. We're going to start with what's a watershed. We're going to talk a little bit about stormwater runoff. And we're going to go into the nuts and bolts of, how you have healthy plants, which is building healthy soil to begin with. But also the most important thing about plant choice, you need to know how you're going to design your yard and make good plant choices. So we're going to talk a lot about plants tonight. All right, so this is a very, I think, succinct description of what a watershed is. Basically, what it says is that there are areas of land which have in common a water system, hydrologic system, where water's coming out of the sky, falling onto the ground, going into our bodies of water, moving through the landscape and ending up in one place and in some place in common typically. So they have a common water course. And of course, this is where human beings, found to settle because we need water to survive and we need it for many things, to move, for commerce, to move things, to move ourselves. And so the U.S. Geological Survey, has been looking at defining watersheds and describing them and keeping track of where they are in their health for many, many years. This is a little map of the watersheds in Creek and Bothell. And you can see creeks, that should say, pardon me. You can see the watershed boundary with the big thick purple line. So what this is showing is that there's water moving through the landscape here. Some of this moves into Lake Sammamish and then goes out into Lake Washington, which then goes through Lake Union and back out into Puget Sound. So there's this continuous waterway. We're not disconnected from each other. One watershed will connect to another eventually. They end up in common places in the long run. So you can look at this on a small scale, you can look at it on a big scale, but basically whatever we do to the ground is going to end up in that water. As Christy mentioned in her intro, we want to make sure that people are not over fertilizing. If you can avoid chemical fertilizers, if you don't use pesticides, none of that will end up in our watersheds. So I love this little schematic that I got from this gentleman at University of Illinois many years ago. I found it online, asked him if we could use it. So I didn't have to build it, but it's a really sweet little, it's a really sweet little map showing how things move. So water is coming off of the bodies of water. As it evaporates, it's going to go up into the air as vapor. It collects. We have all these beautiful clouds. They hold moisture. It rains back down, hits the mountaintops. Often, and in the Northwest, we know that it's going to be bounded. We're bounded by the Olympics and the Cascades, and we have this wonderful system where moisture collects, falls down as snow in the mountains, and could melt in the spring and then runs off, goes back into the bodies of water. And anything that we are touching it with along the way then is going to be affecting the water that ends up back in the big bodies of water. Right now, we have all our water districts asking us to conserve water. And I know it came at an odd time of year for people, right in the beginning of fall, right when it's starting to rain. We think, oh my gosh, we have lots of rain. Why do we need to worry about it? Part of what they're doing is getting ahead of the curve because they're predicting an El Nino year. They want to make sure that people understand that we need to do some conservation because our reservoirs aren't as full as they typically would be at this time of year. And though we have enough water at the moment, if it continues, we won't have enough water next summer when we need it again, for heavy use for irrigation and for drinking water even. So we need to conserve. There's messaging out with every water district. I'm sure you've seen it. And so I just would encourage you to take a look at that and help try to mitigate the potential issues in the future. So water's a big part of our ecology. And then of course, plants are the, big part of the ecology. And then all of the animals that live in one or the other or both, including ourselves. We have all kinds of different water bodies. We have, sloughs and creeks and rivers and, Puget Sound, which is part of the Salish Sea. We've got lots of different wetlands. A lot of what we do in our yards is mimicking of some of the features that we see ecologically on the landscape. And so, we're trying to create a habitat in our garden that's going to be healthy and support good life in the soil and in our yards, the wildlife that comes through. And we want to be able to have repercussions into the landscape at large. So the natural ecology of Puget Sound has this interwoven blend of things. If you've ever been down to the Mima Mounds, you've seen that interesting prairie land, south of Puget Sound. And there's just a lot of diversity in the west side of the state that we have this, beautiful space to share. The picture you see on the far right bottom are actually herons that used to nest in cottonwood trees near where I used to live in Northeast Seattle when I was at Picardo Pea Patch. So this was near my house. And at one point we had 12 herons nest there. It was a sort of a mini colony. So you could have, herons nesting by some of you may have that. I know there's a big colony up in Lake Forest Park. And then infrastructure affects, how everything works. We're looking at an aerial photo, looking at the bridges going across Lake Washington. But all these things, we have to live here. We have to function. We have to have water. We want light. We want heat. We have commercial developments. We have industry. We're moving around. So there's lots of transportation corridors. We have to have our houses. But within that, we also build parks and trails and, have our gardens. We want to have, beauty around us as well. We live in this beautiful place. So, thoughtful planning, of course, helps with this, but you can plan what's going on your own property, to interface with the natural ecology of the area. And we always encourage people to think about putting in plants that attract wildlife. If everybody in your neighborhood or in your area where you live is doing that, you are creating corridors for wildlife to move through, even where there's been major development. All right, so let's talk about that stormwater runoff that we are, seeing because we have impervious surfaces. So you can kind of see in these pictures sort of some different kinds of solutions and ways water moves in the landscape or water is collected in a landscape. You've got, wetlands that are like rain garden creations that are mimicking a natural wetland. You've got just a sewer drain where, you know, water goes, or a storm drain where water goes down the storm drain. In Seattle, we have combined sewers. And so we have a storm drain combined with our sewage coming out of our house, which in theory was supposed to all go to treatment, but we get big storm events and then sewage ends up in the water around us, the bodies of water around us. So there are issues with that. Storm events can be really overwhelming. I don't know if any of you have ever seen, I have seen this happen. Actually, it was up in Victoria, BC, this really huge rainstorm, and water was coming back up out of the storm drains because it was just so overwhelming. There were like fountains of water spurting out of the storm drains all over the city. But this happens, this big influx of water happens because we've removed tree cover, we've removed wetlands. We have this overwhelming volume of water that can fall in a day. You know, you could get inches in a day. We had a squall the other night. In fact, it was pretty amazing. I was driving back from Redmond at night, and it was, there were lakes on the highways, and you couldn't see some of them. A lot of hydroplaning going on. It was a pretty intense drive. But all of this overwhelms what's going on and then can flood areas. We have certain areas of the Puget Sound, southern Puget Sound in particular, that flood a lot because at the end of Puget Sound, that's kind of like the end of the waterway, and there's nowhere for the water to go. It just dead ends there. You can have erosion happen because of it. And then, of course, the big issue is all the pollutants that are coming off the street. We have a lot of heavy metals and hydrocarbons that come from our cars. Even bicycles contribute to that with their brake pads. So, you know, nobody's immune from this, from contributing. And, you know, whatever we can do to slow water down in the landscape is the most important thing. So stormwater runoff contributes 75% of the pollution that we find in Puget Sound. And we have seen poor water quality in many, many streams, rivers, and lakes around Puget Sound. We have lost 30 to 100% wetlands, 75% Puget Sound saltwater marshes around the different areas of Puget Sound. If you know Seattle at all, and I live very near this area, Harbor Island, of course, wasn't an island. It was all man-made. The Duwamish River wasn't a straight river. It was a meandering channel with a bunch of rivers that fed into it, the Green, White, and the Black rivers. And some of those don't even exist anymore. It was a saltwater marsh. It came filled with the tides, and they've been doing some miraculous restoration down there. There's some really beautiful parks that have been being built along the Duwamish River. But, you know, it's a super fun site with a lot of industry along it. But then, you know, that's one thing. But then what we do in our yards, in 1995, now I don't have a newer number than this, but drinking water in the Midwest, 28 of 29 cities tested found pesticides in it, and higher levels than are really safe for us. So, you know, this goes up and down, depends on what we're using. You know, policy changes, people's habits change, the kinds of pesticides we use change, and all of that matters. But, you know, that being said, we contribute to the cause by what we do in our gardens. So there are ways to control storm runoff. One of the most simple ways is to collect rainwater. When you have water running off a big surface, this is the Pickering Barn and out in Issaquah. We have water coming off the roof that's so big like this, goes down the downspouts, and typically is tied into some sort of storm drain and then goes out. And so there's lots of water. It can be overwhelming. It can back up, but the goal is really to slow it down. So if you deposit it into some sort of receptacle, and there's a lot of rain barrels hooked up together here on purpose, because one rain barrel would never, of course, be enough to capture the amount of water that would come off this roof. You can put cisterns in but you're trying to capture enough water so that then you let it out slowly. You can fill these barrels up and prevent it from moving through the landscape. But in the wintertime, typically you keep them a little bit open so that you keep them open so that that water can move back, but you've slowed it down. And that's the main thing. So it's not happening all at once. We also create permeable surfaces. So, like this wood chip pathway, water will soak into that better. And so there are ways to keep water on site, to have it soak into the ground and not have it just move through the drains and out into our waterways. A rain garden is another way to do that. This is basically mimicking a wetland, highly improved soil with lots and lots of compost in it that can hold a lot of water. And you put very specialized plants in the Northwest, native plants. Many of them are tolerant of this kind of deep, wet soil. They can be standing in water in the wintertime. They pond for a short period of time. The goal is to not have a standing pond, but for water to filter out. They hold pollutants that are coming into it. And so lots of really cool native plants. So people, I don't think, give enough credit to the beautiful native plants we have. Everybody knows, salal, and everybody knows, Oregon grape probably, and sword ferns and Douglas firs. And maybe you even know, the evergreen huckleberry. It's a beautiful plant, been used in landscapes for years. But there's all these really beautiful flowering deciduous shrubs as well, like some of what you're seeing in the right pictures here. The red-stemmed dogwoods, some of the ribes, the red flowering currant that's so great for hummingbirds. So thinking about, putting in features like this, you can have this beautiful setting in your garden as well. Choosing the right plants that are going to be on the different zones that they've laid out here. Zone 3 is basically the driest part of the garden. It's up on the mound, up on the crest. Zone 2 can be somewhat moist, and then Zone 1. A lot of times you're going to see sedges and rushes down in that zone that can stand in water. Really cool. But you can even see there's a Pacific crabapple tree in this. They can handle that wet soil. So it's really important to reduce impervious surfaces. So you want to have water that moves into the ground, even if you want to have a place that feels paved that you can walk through. There are ways to do that. There's different kinds of concrete, gravel accommodations you can make to pathways that water will move through. So there's permeable pavement. You do have to do some maintenance on it. You can see in the picture on the top right, that's an example of some. It kind of looks like, reminds me of a Rice Krispie treat, the way it's all sort of like glued together like that. And it does sort of look like that. But you can imagine in all those pore spaces that soil and organic matter can get in there. So you actually have to vacuum these sometimes to pull that stuff out of there. You can make it much more simple than that. You could put gravel in, put a base in with some gravel. Water's going to move through it. You do have to keep the weeds down here. You could use like a vinegar spray, or you could use heat. You can get flamers that will like put out a huge amount of steam, hot steam, and kill weeds in areas like this. Or you can use something like wood chips, which you could continue to reapply. And so as they break down, they actually feed the soil underneath it and will help. So all of these things are useful. And, it depends, a lot of it's aesthetics or practicality of what's going to work for your garden. You could have some ground covers. So you see in that top left picture, you can also have some things that are steppable, times, in between flagstone paveways, areas and pockets where you put little plants that you can step on as well. So here's some examples of ways people store rainwater. An inch of rain on 1,000 square foot surface can net you 623 gallons. So, if it's raining over and over and over again, that's a lot. So a cistern is going to be more practical for holding water. A rain barrel is going to fill up right away, and then you're going to cap it off so that it's not just spilling over. You have to have some sort of way, if you're going to run these during the winter, you have to have them open. So you're not really holding the water. As I said, you're just slowing it down. And then later in the late spring, you would start capping them off so you can collect the water. All right, now let's talk about soil. Soil is kind of the basis of plant health. You can see this fabulous little seedling with all that root system growing out. You know, we see that tiny little thing above the ground, and there's all kinds of magic happening under the soil. Soil needs to drain well. It needs to have good nutrient in it for roots to grow. But certain kinds of plants can also help you do that and help you open soil up. So good, healthy soil will reduce your need to put extra chemicals into the soil, fertilizers, or use pesticides. It'll reduce how much water you have to put on the ground. So if you have really healthy soil under your lawn, for instance, and you have aerated it and made sure that water can penetrate through, there's not a thatch buildup, you don't have to water as often. You want it to filter out urban pollutants and sequester stormwater, which we just talked about. And then, of course, you know, helping with climate change, storing carbon from the atmosphere. The organic matter in soil is carbon-based. And so we're trying to keep it in the ground and not gassing off into the air. So here are ways that you can build healthy soil. You can add mulch to your garden beds. You know, one of the best things you can do is allow the leaves that are falling right now to stay in your beds, as long as they're not smothering your lawn, smothering your plants. If you have too many of them, you don't want too many to accumulate at the base of woody plants. That can be bad for them, but you can move them away. If you have too many, you can rake them off. Some of them, leave a layer of leaves, rake some off, put them in a bag and store them for the winter. And then you can continue to use them. You can make a compost pile with them and make leaf mold. Fabulous product to put down on your plants. And you can share them with your neighbors. I'm always trying to encourage people to do that. I don't have very many leaves, so I typically go find them from other people. My sister goes around her neighborhood and rakes people's leaves up so she can put them in her garden where they don't want them. So there's ways to share leaves in a neighborhood as well, and, you know, be a good citizen, as well as, you know, get a good product for your garden. You can also add compost, which is just other organic matter. It could be worm compost coming out of your own personal worm bin. It could be yard waste compost that comes from Lens Composting or Cedar Grove, who take in municipal compost or municipal waste from different cities and then make compost back, sell it back to us. Those are great compost. Lens is up in Arlington, up north, and Cedar Grove, of course, is out in Maple Valley and up in Marysville. And these guys have been doing this for years. They both have different ways that they do it, and they make decent products. They do have certified organic products, so, you know, you can choose something that you could buy back from them if you want to. And they get all their material from us. So, you know, we're supplying it to them so that they can make this product. You can also do living mulches with growing cover crops, especially in open areas, and especially in a vegetable garden. And you can see an example of that in the left side picture, where we've got some vetch growing in a little bed that had other vegetables in it over the winter time. You can do this also where you're trying to improve soil. So say you're trying to make a new garden bed in your yard and you don't want to plant it yet. You could grow a lot of cover crop over it in the wintertime, and that'll help protect the soil, and then keep it from getting compacted, keep the nutrients in the soil, and then it will add nutrient and organic matter when you dig it in. Especially in lawns, I mentioned it's important to aerate. And using organic fertilizers, again, that whole concept of using things that are made from actual real plant material or rock and mineral to fertilize, rather than giving chemical fertilizers to your plants. Chemical fertilizers can harm soil life, and the organic fertilizers or any compost that you dig in, or leaf mulch, or you know, wooden mulch that you put on the garden bed actually feeds the microorganisms in the soil, and that's what makes your plants be able to use the nutrient. It's a relationship that we're building. You can test your soil. You can send it out for testing, places like King Conservation District, Snohomish Conservation District. You can send it out to UMass in Massachusetts, actually does a great soil test. They actually will also tell you if you have lead in your soil through that simple test. You can do core samples like you see in this picture here to sort of get an idea of how your soil profile looks. Do you only have good soil like in the top 2 inches? How can you get that deeper? Is your soil clay? Is it sandy? All those things help you determine what you need to do to the soil, but also what plants you can grow. So mulch is basically just some kind of organic material that's spread around or over a plant to enrich or insulate the soil. And when they say over a plant, sometimes that means, you've planted something under the ground that's going to come up through it. Typically, we're putting mulch around things. And so you see some different examples here. Some straw mulch you see also in the bottom picture. That's a more commercial blend. So wood shavings and manure or sawdust and manure blends you can buy, and they look a little more natural. You can also buy things like, wood chips. You can buy cedar chips, or you can get them free from arborists. There's those free leaves again. You can use your own grass clippings. You want to be careful about clumping them up too much because they're very high in nitrogen. You have to spread them out so that they will dry out pretty well. Otherwise, they can have quite an odor, and I'm sure some of you have encountered that. You can take weeds and then chop them up. I do that a lot when I'm weeding. I actually just cut them into little pieces and drop them back on the ground. And then that just becomes mulch around my garden, especially in the vegetable garden. It's really easy to do. Hazelnut shells can work. You want to be careful. That can attract critters. Sometimes squirrels love that stuff. Some people get mulch from coffee companies, or especially the chocolate, like Theo's chocolate used to give out the shells from the cacao, but that can actually be harmful to dogs. So you want to be aware of, what the downside of some of these things could be. Bark is used commercially all over the place, but bark by nature is something that inhibits water from getting into the soil. It's meant to protect a tree or a shrub from getting moisture into the live wood. And so it can be water repellent and can actually inhibit water from getting down into your ground. And then, like in a vegetable bed, you can simply lay burlap over it to protect your soil for the winter. Very easy to do. Lots of different kinds of compost. Some of them are manure-based, like this composted chicken manure, very high in nitrogen. You can get, I was talking to a woman this morning out in Redmond who just got Zoodoo for her garden. And she went and dug it up, and you go and you can fill your vehicle up with it. And then there are those blended mulches that have manure in them as well. You can get garden compost that's made from yard waste, like the Cedar Grove and like the Lens compost. A lot of worm-based compost could be, coming out in your own backyard if you raise worms. All of it's good. Worm compost is probably one of the Cadillacs of compost because it's got so many great micronutrients in it. And then here's some living mulch. So here's an example of the kinds of mulches you can use for growing. These have other purposes. Farmers use cereal grains as a winter grain crop, and then they dig it in after they've harvested the grain. You can just grow it and not let it go to seed and turn it into the soil in the spring. So cereal grasses, and then pea family plants like vetch or Austrian pea or crimson clover. The vetch is the purple flower, crimson clover is the red. These guys are wonderful pollinator plants as well. They will bring in tons of bees, and lady beetles love crimson clover. I've seen them all over it. Sometimes you can do a mix, like the pea and the grass mix together will hold each other up. They can be quite beautiful. It helps to break up the rain, and it helps to protect the soil, keep it warmer, and adds tons of nutrient. So let's talk about plant design. This is fun. This is the fun stuff. So we're looking at this wonderful picture with all of these different textures. This is just green stuff. And you can see that even without flowers on it, plants have a lot of beauty, a lot of texture. They have different colors of green, different shapes of leaves, different orientation of how they grow. And you can mix and match and do all kinds of fun stuff with them. So the first thing is you want to get to know your site. And so we talked about, knowing your soil conditions. So this is showing somebody doing a coring, just to see what kind of soil's under the ground. You can see in that core sample, I think you can see my mouse, but if this little section here, right about to there, it's dark. So that's where the good soil is. And then it's pretty decent to about here. And then it starts looking a lot paler and more clayey as you get further down. So you can see there's been improvement in the soil over time. And you can actually get your soil to be improved probably as deep as, maybe way down to here in a lawn setting even. But you certainly can do it in a shrub bed. So our goal is to improve soil underneath our plants so that we have great habitat for all the little microorganisms. So check your soil conditions out. Where's your house? Where are the buildings on the property? Where are your permanent pathways, fences, also large trees that you don't plan to remove? And then you're going to draw a map. It can be as simple as you want it to be. You can go to different government sites, property sites, where you can get an overview of your property that shows the dimensions of everything, and then you can use that sort of as your base and draw over that, get some vellum paper and just draw over the top of it. And basically you're trying to identify some of the things you really need to be thinking about so that you know what kind of choices you need to make in terms of, do I need to change this? Or do I need to adapt to it and buy plants that will work here? So where is it really wet? Where doesn't it drain well? If you can't change that, there are plants that will adapt to that. So like those things that will grow in a rain garden. Where is it rocky or compacted? A lot of people have glacial till, in their gardens in the Northwest. It's not uncommon. Or if you're on the coastlines, either of Puget Sound or Lake Washington, you may have very sandy or very clay soil, or maybe both, sand on clay, which is what causes those landslides. You might have areas that are really, really windy or exposed. You may be getting a lot of weather out of the south. We get a lot of winds out of the southwest in the wintertime, a lot of rain. That tends to be warmer weather. And then we get that north blast coming out of the north, which brings our snow. Of course, Bothell is up there in the convergence zone. And, I'm a little warmer down here in northwest Seattle. Where are your steep slopes? Do you want to change that? Do you want to terrace? Do you want to try and live stake plants, make it more of a natural garden and just put a lot of erosion prevention plants up there? Where is it hard for you to access? Do you need to change that? Do you need to make that more a utility site and just open it up? Do you have a lawn maybe that's in too much shade and you're actually not doing yourself any favors by trying to keep that alive? If you have deep eaves on your house, you're likely to have dry spots in the wintertime. Those plants may not get rained on. So you make sure that you're putting plants in there that can handle a little bit of drought, because the last thing you're going to want to do is go out there, especially if you've shut your outside water off. You don't want to go out there and water things that are, under your rooftop. And also if you have big conifers, which many people do in their gardens, in their yards, conifers shade and prevent a lot of moisture from getting to the ground. And so it's very dry. It can be very dry underneath them, and they use up a lot of the water that does fall coming off of them, off of their branches, falls in the drip line around the tree. And then you need to put in plants underneath like a Doug fir that can handle that kind of dry soil. So then you have, all your light conditions. Where is it sunny? When is it sunny? Is it sunny all day long, or is it sunny in the morning and then gets a break and then gets hot afternoon sun? All of that makes a difference as to what kinds of choices you make. When we talk about partly shady and you're looking at plant lists going, oh gosh, they all say, part sun. What does that mean? Well, it can mean all those different things. And so it can be complicated. And, that's why professional gardeners can help you with understanding, the tolerance some plants have. But you should also know that plants are pretty tolerant. So a lot of them can do full sun and then also have some sun. So it's fine. They can traverse that divide. And then there are some places that could be really hot in your garden. You could have a south facing front of your house that's a brick facing, and it gets hit by the southwest sun and late afternoon and the afternoon sun, and that brick warms up and holds heat. And so that's going to be a really hot spot compared to the area around the corner that's in the shade and faces east and is between two houses and just has a bunch of moss growing because it's just always kind of shady and cool back there. Very different kinds of environments that you can find in different areas of one garden. So here's an example of a little plan. You can have all these different areas in your yard. So this is just a base map, and you can decide, okay, what do I do in this sunny, hot area? Do I put a vegetable garden out here? Do I build a rose garden? Do I build my herb garden? Or do I want to put my herbs on this deck here where they're closer to the house so I can go out and pick them? Do I want to have more of a xeriscape setting here where everything doesn't need very much water? In the Northwest, you can actually grow cacti here as long as you have good drainage in the soil. There's a lot of really interesting plants, some palms, some cacti, certain banana trees. You can have a, sort of more deserty looking situation. Here's that dry shade area. What are you going to do there? You have this bank of trees here that's helping to block wind, and it's going to be partially shady or deep shade. And you can have this wonderful native plant garden here. You can also do that against the side of the house here as well. Out front here, you have some very, very sandy soil. It's going to be sunnier, a little bit brighter, but you have this pathway coming into the front door. So maybe you think about fragrant things, especially in the wintertime. If this is your pathway into your house in the winter, having those fragrant plants here rather than back here in the far corner where you're never going to smell them makes more sense. And then you have this little level that steps down here and stays kind of wet. Maybe on part of it you put in blueberries over here where it gets a little more sun, and you move into other kinds of boggy plants that can handle a little bit more shade. So lots of variety that you can think about. We usually encourage that people pick plants that can thrive without irrigation. So after about 3 years of getting them established, you don't have to water very much. With our climate changing, with June being drier than it used to be, June used to be that recharge month when rain would come in and we would get all kinds of, moisture in the ground that can hold our plants through July and August when it's the driest. Seafair is when it is because it's the driest time of the year in the Northwest. My mom used to send me to camp in June, to Girl Scout camp in June, which made me really mad because it was always very cold and we had to go swimming. We had to learn to swim, and nobody wanted to get in the lake out there in Carnation at that time of year. But she wanted to take the family camping in the good months. So, we got our better months later. But, knowing your climate, knowing what happens during the year can help you to establish a good, healthy garden. So choosing plants that are pest and disease resistant. You may love deciduous azaleas, but some of them are real powdery mildew magnets. Maybe you pick one that has resistance to it and you don't have to worry about it. Same is true for some roses that get black spot on them. They may have the most beautiful flowers, but they just defoliate and they look terrible. and you can't do much about it. You can try continuing to spray, but that's something you're going to have to do all the time, even if you're using non-chemical sprays or non-toxic sprays. You're still spraying all the time. You're still buying product. You're still, spending money, and you're still spending time. Native plants, we do definitely encourage people to pick those. They are adapted to this climate, typically have fewer problems, not 100%, but they will typically have fewer problems and are beautiful as well. So if you're thinking about a lawn and you're thinking about vegetables, these are higher maintenance projects, depending on how you do them. You need to make sure that they have the conditions they need, and they both like the same thing. They both like healthy, well-drained soil. They both like a lot of sun, 6 to 8 hours. You can put a raised bed or container garden in an area that doesn't have really good soil. So if you don't want to spend a lot of time improving your soil, build a raised bed, and then you can control that soil much more easily. You can weed it more easily. You can mulch it more easily. And it's very easy to do. You can sheet mulch areas and use cover crops and mulch in areas that you're trying to improve the soil and build and change it. For instance, this site on the right, that's a steep slope with grass. This is a terrible spot to try and mow. So you could be sheet mulching this over the winter time, and then kill all that grass, and then you could do some sort of live staking on this hillside with native plants that will root into place and then become just part of this beautiful, hillside garden. Much easier to take care of. If you plant it correctly, you get enough plants in there, you don't have to do a lot of weeding over time. Get some good ground covers in place that will help take care of it. Finding the appropriate plants for the appropriate site that's difficult, like shade or slope or poor soil or boggy soils. So, lots of things to be aware of and thinking about when you're creating your garden. It's important to choose plants that have multiple seasons of interest. So, sometimes it's like, I just like that rose when it blooms, and then the rest of the year, it just doesn't look like much of anything to you. Now, I love roses, so I'm not going to disparage roses and just, try to dissuade you from planting them at all. But I do want people to think about the fact that, you may have a plant that's going to have really beautiful winter bark on it, or it may have these really cool new colored leaves that are different than the mature leaves on it. There are some 9-bark hybrids. 9-bark is a native shrub, and there are some 9-bark hybrids that come out with these beautiful bronzy leaves that turn to green. They have bark that has like sort of multiple colors of brown on it. So in the wintertime, they have a really interesting texture and look. Or their foliage, their twig color, the twig patterns. So like in this birch tree, there's a lot of laciness to it. It's a little bit lighter and airier than, for instance, this paperbark maple on the left. But both of them have this gorgeous peeling bark that's different. So you have this thing that has this incredible winter interest, and then it's really pretty when it fills out with leaves, great shade. You can also add, structural elements, arbors, garden art, textural paving to the garden, lots of benches. We put some new benches in the children's garden in Wallingford at Tilth that actually convert into little picnic tables. So you can change them so they are a bench with a back, or you flip them so that they become a little table with a bench that you can sit at. It's important to shop different times of year. Lots of different sales at different times of year in the nurseries, because they know that. Going in the fall, great fall sales. I think most of those are probably past now, but you can find some great plants in the fall. They're not just selling you last year's leftovers, they're selling you new plants. It's a good time to go walk in the neighborhood and see what colors you like, fall color. Go in the spring and see what's blooming, go in the summer and see what's blooming. Walking around at different times of year in a nursery, in a garden, or in your neighborhood will help you make choices. And then, of course, always garden to attract wildlife. This is a big thing for me. I want to have lots of birds in my yard. I enjoy watching them. I've seen bats in the neighborhood, not in my yard directly, but they're in the neighborhood, and I see lots of beneficial insects, tons and tons of really cool things, all kinds of interesting native bees of all sorts, hoverflies, golden digger wasps, different butterflies. I've seen red admirals. I've seen lots of swallowtails this year. There were tons of swallowtails this year. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. And all of these are really, fun to have in the garden, but what you put in makes a difference as to who you're going to attract and how much diversity you're going to have. This can also make your maintenance easier. A lot of these insects in particular, and the birds too, eat a lot of pests, plant pests. So aphids are one of those things that are prey for many, many, many wonderful critters that come and join you in your garden. Many birds, like chickadees, feed their young insects exclusively, and then they eat some themselves. There are a lot of interesting parasitic little creatures like the parasitoid wasps that lay eggs inside of aphids and kill them by their developing young inside of them. And you can know they're there by an aphid body being bloated and kind of tan, and it has a little hole in it where the adult aphid, after it fully matured and hatched out, flew out of that insect. It takes a minute for predator populations to catch up to their prey. So you might see a whole bunch of aphids. We always encourage people not to spray too fast. You're going to harm the beneficial insects that are also on site. So if you're trying to encourage them, be a little cautious with your sprays so that you can have this population in your garden. Lots of really fun animals and different birds. Now, people often, when I give talks about wildlife gardens, they often talk about, what about this? So mammals come up over and over again as problematic residents and visitors. Squirrels, deer, bears, mountain beavers, moles, all those guys. Mammals are the hardest thing to control. But they're, we can talk about that endlessly, and you're welcome to call the hotline and talk to us about that there too. But there are lots of ways to manage that, but they are harder. Insects are way easier by comparison. And then when you're thinking about choices for the garden, a lot of our natives are just beautiful, just plain beautiful. Like we're looking at Western red cedar, which is sort of the ubiquitous, Northwest tree. And then there are native roses that get these little rose hips on them that are edible. And these guys are beautiful and colorful. And they actually, in the wintertime, they're really kind of sparkly when the rain is all over them. They can be quite gorgeous. They make thickets, and a lot of animals eat these, and you can harvest them yourself. So these plants are accustomed to our wet winters and dry summers. They're going to tolerate it better. They provide food, shelter, water, habitat for native fauna. And native fauna recognize native plants. It's not that they don't know and don't use other plants, but they will use these first. Something like this blooming Oregon grape that you see at the bottom. This is the tall Oregon grape that gets these beautiful yellow flowers on it. There are beautiful hybrids of this as well with some really fantastic huge leaves and big huge flowers. There's some really spectacular plants. These bloom very early in the season. Super important food for Anna's hummingbirds. So this is a great choice for a garden if you know you have hummingbirds. I have outside the window right to my left here this funny little clematis that grows up and over the arbor going where my gate is, that goes over my gate. And right now it has these little tiny bell-shaped kind of ivory colored flowers. They're pretty nondescript. They're cute. They're kind of, some of them more yellow than ivory, but not super colorful, not like, outstanding like we think of clematis with those big, huge, colorful flowers. This thing took forever to establish. Once it did, it blooms now pretty much from summer, from May all the way through the fall. It's supposed to be a fall bloomer, quote unquote. And it is blooming now prolifically, but I get flowers all summer long on that. And the hummingbirds are all over it right now. So I can just look out my window when I'm working at the computer, and there they are. Really wonderful. And native plants require less inputs in general. They don't need much. They're adapted to the, rocky soils, clay soils, sandy soils. They don't need very many fertilizers, and they don't need, certainly don't need pesticides. So we are trying to put in food for wildlife. Here's one of the little hummingbirds. Looks like on a penstemon there. We've got a swallowtail on some lavender. Things like black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, echinacea, especially that create those seed heads at the end. You don't want to be too tidy. You want to leave those on, because that's part of the charm of it, is that birds will eat that through the winter. So a lot of like finches love stuff like this. They will come in and pull all these seeds out and eat them. I have had juncos on my Rudbeckia sticking up out of the snow. They're all over it when the snow comes, because it's something for them to eat. So we're trying to supply pollen, we're trying to supply nectar, we're trying to supply seeds, and all of this will bring all these different little critters in. And we want to provide shelter. You need places for birds to hide, especially if you're attracting birds from their predators. So if you have bird feeders and you have a lot of songbirds in your yard, you're going to see birds of prey as well. They will be around. So you need to provide areas to protect them, places for them to nest. The more variety in height you have, from ground cover up to tall tree, the more variety of types of animals you will have in your yard. Mix it up with evergreen and deciduous plants, and keep it more informal. People tend to think in terms of building a wall. I'm going to build a fence line of plants and everything's in a straight row, but that's not natural. If you go in the woods, think about, take note of how things are staggered and placed, so that there's dimensionality in it, and there's depth, and you're looking into a landscape, and it's going to look much more beautiful to you. Leave some natural areas. So this is sedum. This is tall sedum early in the spring. It's tall and blooming right now, and it has that sort of pinky flower on it. And these hollow stems can be homes for nesting bees. So there's a lot of native bees that nest in tubes like this, like leafcutter bees and mason bees. So you want to be protected of that. And don't knock them down in the winter, leave them on. That's going to protect all the new growth. There's tiny little buds sitting here, like you see here, under the mulch, and you want to leave some cover for those plants. So in the spring, when you go to cut them down, when they're starting to enlarge and grow, you want to check the tubes and see if anybody's in there. If they are, and maybe just in general, leave the stuff that you cut on the ground so that they are at least still in place. You can protect them better that way. Hummingbirds will use things like this fluff from Japanese anemone to put into their nests. They also use lichen, moss, and spider silk to make their nests. You can actually put nest boxes in. So what we're seeing here are like, cavity nesters, like for chickadee, or these mason bee boxes as well. And then water's important. Make sure it's shallow. Make sure there's a rough surface. Keep it clean. You don't want these guys drowning, and you don't want them getting toxic water. All right, so let's look at some more good plant choices specifically. Okay, trees are environmental heroes. They stabilize our soil, they prevent erosion, reduce stormwater runoff, provide food and shelter for wildlife. They can clean the air, they cool the environment. I've had trees that kept frost off my car, especially evergreen trees in the wintertime. And then when that tree was removed, all of a sudden my car is all frosty every morning. When I go out, I have to scrape it. But the trees, evergreen trees, breathe during the winter. They're still transpiring, still photosynthesizing, and they will warm up the air around them. I've seen my yard in Northeast Seattle have no frost on the little tiny lawn I had out front, and all my neighbors to the west of me were in wide open, out in, in the sun even, and they were completely frosted because they didn't have the array of trees I had around my lawn that was actually mitigating the climate in that little area, making a microclimate. They're beautiful trees. We love our cherry trees in the spring, but you want to make sure you're putting in something that's the right size for the right place so that you don't have to prune it very much. Pruning can harm a tree over time. You don't want to top them ever if you can get away. Fruit trees being an exception to that because we are manipulating them, but topping trees can kill them. Pruning them too much can introduce disease. We're really trying to let them grow to scale. So choosing the right tree for the spot that you need it to grow in makes a difference. You're not going to put a big, huge tree like the ones you see in the bottom, which look like plain trees to me in this picture, but you're not going to put them in where these cherry trees are, for instance. That would never work. Here are some ideas of things you can put in dry shade. We have a lot of that in the Northwest. We don't know we do, but we do. A lot of people, we think about the climate here is so wet, but in the summer, things are very dry. Under all these big trees, things are very dry. A lot of native plants will do well there. Ephemeral plants like bleeding heart that comes up and then dies back can do well in a setting like that. Hardy cyclamen also does that. Woodland plants that in their native environment thrive in filtered shade in a forest, like epimedium is a classic plant for in dry shade under trees. Hellebores can do well there too, wild ginger like asarum. And then spring blooming bulbs, especially under a deciduous tree where there's light when they're blooming because there's no leaves on the tree. And then by the time the leaves start to leaf out and cast a lot of shade, these guys are dying back. So it can be a really good choice. Plus, you're not watering the soil under there because you don't have anything else. Say you just have this huge bulb garden. You don't water that soil, those bulbs are going to thrive. They don't like to stay wet over the summertime. We have a lot of dry summers and full sun areas. Again, Pacific Northwest natives. You can see even down here, here's some more Oregon grape. This is the low Oregon grape that has still the yellow flowers, but it's reddish because it's in more sun and it can tolerate some sun. There's sedum I mentioned before, a lot of Mediterranean herbs, lots of ornamental grasses do really well in dry, hot sites. Plants that come from New Zealand, California, Mexico, all of those do really well in dry, hot climates in your yard, microclimates in your garden. And there's tons of things that bloom that have beautiful leaf shape. You can see all the different textures, of this carex here, this grassy looking thing. It's not a true grass, but it's grass-like. The euphorbias with the sort of blue-green leaf. You can have a lot of really beautiful contrast textures. But these plants are suited to that environment so that you're not putting a lot of extra inputs into the soil. So giving them a good start, you're going to build healthy soil by digging in the compost, mulch after they're planted. And when you're planting, don't just put compost in the planting hole, put it in the bed. If you can't do that, because you have too much stuff in there, then don't amend the soil in the planting hole. Plant your tree or your shrub and then put top dressing of compost in the whole bed, because soil microorganisms and macroorganisms like worms will pull all of that in and they will improve the soil, over time in a more passive manner than you having to actually dig it in. It's important to plant things right. You can see in the schematic down here, root systems fan out. You don't want to bury a trunk of a tree too deeply. At the surface, you want to see the trunk flare into the root zone. So often there's this little flare coming off the base of the tree. If you bury that and all you see is a straight trunk coming out, typically it's too deep in the ground. And that can happen also from putting too much mulch around it. You can kill your tree doing that. So you spread the roots out. If you're doing bare root, you put a little mound of soil down, spread the roots out over it, and then plant around it. Mulching the ground, you want to do it year round. So you can put mulch down now, you can put it down in the spring, you can do it in the summer, and that will do it. It does service all year long to keep weeds down, to warm or cool the soil, and to keep erosion down, and also to keep water in place so it's not moving too fast through the soil. So water wisely, use the right tools, make sure if you have an irrigation system that you're keeping up on it, that over time as plants grow, if you have an automatic irrigation system and you have pop-up risers that come up out of the ground, you may have a tree or shrub that has grown to block that, so it's not watering what it's supposed to. You may have water that's overspraying. If you're watering your lawn, it's overspraying the sidewalk and doesn't need to. Have the right head on there, so you're only like watering the plant. I've seen that so much where water's just being wasted. It doesn't do your pocketbook any good. It doesn't really do the plants any good, and it doesn't do our environment any good. It's better to not overhead water things because you can encourage disease by getting too much moisture on leaves, in particular if you water at night. So watering in the morning will decrease the incidence of the disease. And then also you can use timers. It's good. I used to do this when I worked at City Light. I'd set the timer for all the lawn to come on for 10 minutes. So there may be 3 zones on the lawn. I'd set it on 10 minutes. And then it would come back on for 20 minutes. And so that goal of that was to pre-soak, so to speak, have a pre-soak cycle so that water would penetrate better instead of just running off. Nowadays, there's all these fancy, timers that you can even get timers that are just hooked up to your hose system. If you have like soaker hoses, and you can have a rain sensor that will shut it down if there's enough rain. So there are all these different wonderful ways to protect your water. Out in Las Vegas, there's actually a place called the Las Vegas Wash where they run city water through this natural wetland system, and they've enhanced it, but they actually are running water, street water, back out through this wetland area right outside the city. That's like this beautiful park, and that's what that picture up above is. So there's a million kinds of plants. There's a million kinds of ideas. At the hotline, we're there to help you at Tilth. There's master gardener clinics. There's tons of resources. There's that great book that Christy had and showed you. I have mine right here to my right. And as you can see behind me, I have a bookshelf full of books too. So many resources and so many great resources in the Northwest to help you make those choices.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, yes.
We are going to get into the Q&A in just a moment. Before we do that, we have one more set of poll questions we'd like to ask you. Again, if you want to answer these questions, just helps us evaluate the effectiveness of our programs. And you can win a prize if you want. We've got this great book called Right Plant, Right Place by Nicola Ferguson. We have a $25 Molbach's gift card. We have a 90-minute consultation with Laura. She'll give you recommendations about your yard.
There's my book.
Which one? Oh, which one is that?
That's Nicola's book.
Okay, that's the same one.
Yep.
All right. We have another one. So we have a workshop on Saturday, the last of them. And that one we're giving away the Arthur Kruckerberg Guide to Pacific Northwest Native Plants. Is that the name of it? I think.
Yes.
That's
I had that here too the other day. I don't know what I did with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some great books. I always ask Laura, what should we give away? And she gives really great recommendations. So those questions are up right now. I am going to jump into, I'll just take the questions that we have in order. I really like this first one because I'm asking it myself. First question is, what can I plant that will take over? And there's three different plants here if you want to go through them one by one. There's Himalayan blackberry,
Uh,
Japanese knotweed,
ah,
and English ivy.
well, some of our top noxious weeds there.
And the person would like to avoid using herbicide if they can. I know
So you
that's
can,
kind of it's difficult, but
you definitely can, but it's a time consuming thing. So each of them grows in different ways. I'm going to start with English ivy. English ivy is a ground cover. Um, you know, sometimes what we recommend if somebody has a huge expanse of it and it's just like too big a job to get rid of it, keep it trimmed, keep it from becoming mature. So when ivy starts to climb, the leaf shape changes and you can see that visibly. And when it matures, that's when it flowers and puts fruit out, and the birds love it and spread it everywhere. So this is the big problem with ivy. Ivy can be a problem too, in the sense that it can be, habitat for rats. It can get really deep. But if you have a nice bank of it and it's healthy, if you can keep it trimmed, you're doing yourself a favor. If you're really wanting to take it out, what I have seen done in my old neighborhood, I had a neighbor who worked on the Thornton Creek watershed ravine area where those herons were nesting, actually. And what we did with her was take black plastic and spread it over the ivy. And these are steep hills, in this little, creek ravine, and anchor it down and leave it on for like a year or 6 months. And then we would pull it off, and all that ivy would be dead and all the roots had disengaged. And you just roll up these like rolls of dead ivy and truck it out of there. So that's one way to do it. And it's much more doable in a small scale in your garden, right? Than what she was doing. She was very industrious. So that's one thing. It's hard to dig it out. I ended up getting a lot of like allergies to molds by working around ivy a lot because it's always so dusty and full of stuff. So just be aware, wear a mask when you're doing that. We all know how to do that now. So, use it in those applications where it can really help you. If you have any kind of asthma or any kind of breathing issues, it can bother you. Now blackberry's easier than most things and more easier than people think. You do have to dig it out. If it's very entrenched, sometimes that trunk gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it sends long shoots out that root into the ground. So prevent that from happening and you won't have as much to dig out. But basically, if you get invested with the King County Noxious Weed folks, they can sometimes loan you the tools, or you can rent tools sometimes from tool libraries that are weed wrenches. And these are these wonderful ergonomic tools that will get down and grab the crown of the blackberry. You cut it down, leave a little bit there to grab onto. It goes into the ground and you basically yank it out of the ground. You have to have some strength. You can hire some young, strong teenagers, who are interested in doing that kind of work, to help you with that. But that's the easiest way to get blackberry out. And if it's just younger, basically you dig and pull and just be on top of it, stay on top of it. We managed to clear hillside of blackberry at Picardo Farm. Picardo Farm was an old bog that got drained in the 1920s by the Picardo family. They used to farm the whole valley, and they drained that bog and farmed there. And then it became a pea patch in the early 1970s. And it was just this huge bank of blackberry. And that's how we got it out of there. Just persistent digging and staying on top of it for a couple of years. And actually, after that first dig, we didn't have that much coming back. Knotweed's tough. Knotweed can go 12 feet in the ground. It travels underground. It's super persistent. It loves moisture, so you'll see it around stream banks a lot for that reason. Sometimes chemical applications are appropriate for stuff like this, because that's another thing that the noxious weed people, you can get trained in how to use the injectors, and they loan them to you to go out and do. So it depends on your situation. But again, persistence. Where I used to live in Wedgwood, I was right on the Burt Gilman Trail, and one of my neighbors took the knotweed out of this one area that's just mucky soil, because we're between two creeks there, and the soil was always perpetually wet. And he was just persistent. He dug it out, and then he would check it all the time, check it all the time, check it all the time. And the last time I went through there was nothing still coming up again. So, he's been pretty successful with that. So all of this can be done, but it's time consuming, and just knowing their growth habit will help you target what to do.
If anyone wants to get some experience pulling blackberry, we have a couple stewardship groups in Bothell. There's the Friends of North Creek Forest and Wind Scout. They both regularly hold work parties, volunteer parties. And a lot of what they do are removing some of these invasive species. And it does, like Laura said, you have to stay on it, especially with the blackberry, getting some of these giant root balls out. It's not easy stuff, and you have to go over the same area sometimes 3, 4, maybe 5 times before people finally stop coming back. All right, next question. I'm told the soil in my side yard is very acidic. What can I do to make it less so to be able to plant garden vegetables? Now, the one thing that I have heard works well is lime, and I am very much a gardening novice. So I'm glad you're here to answer this.
Yes. So lime is what you use to change a pH of soil. It takes time. You can take a soil test to see how acidic it is. It sounds like maybe you already have done that. You can call the hotline, and we can kind of walk through a soil test with you and talk to you about that. But basically, lime is calcium, loss of calcium from all those winter rains when the nutrient goes too deep in the soil or washes out in the waterways. That's what makes your soil more acidic. That's why Northwest soils are acidic, because of all our rain, our winter rain in particular. And so you can add lime. A soil test will tell you how much, how many pounds per 1,000 square feet that you're going to need. A lot of times they tell you per acre, but you can ask them, make sure they convert that to 1,000 square feet, or they tell you how to do that. And sometimes you don't even have 1,000 square feet. Maybe it may be 100 square feet that you're trying to change. You can also build raised beds, right? And then you don't have to worry about it at all. And, I'm a big proponent of them. I've been gardening, like Christy mentioned, for many, many, many years. And I, hurt my back in my late 20s. I herniated a disc. So that's lived with me forever. And now I'm older. And now, it's just like, oh, that's hard. I don't want to be on my knees. I garden in raised beds. And you can control the soil. And that's way easier, and keep it improved and not worry about those things as much.
The next question is about mulch. What about pine needles? Should you avoid them as mulch?
No. Just know that they do inhibit plants from growing. If you look at a pine forest, there's not a lot of undergrowth, but you can. Here's the beauty of a book like the Kierkegaard book. So come to the class Saturday, so you might win that book, or go buy it, or go get it out of the library. But looking at the philosophy he used, he was a professor at the University of Washington School of Botany, and the philosophy he used was to look at plant communities and how they interact with each other. And so knowing what would grow under a pine tree will help you choose the right plant to put there. Pine needles are fabulous mulch. It's actually really beautiful because it's so fine and delicate. They can build up and get too thick. But, I had clients for many years who had lots of pine, and I would just rake some off. And I sometimes would take it away and put it other places in other yards, or it would go out to the, curbside bin. But it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything, especially if you're trying to adapt. You have this beautiful pine tree, you want to adapt to that setting.
All right, and the last question that is in the Q&A right now, but anyone who's still on with us, please feel free if you have more questions. We've got time to answer them. But for now, this is the last question. You said to not be too quick to spray pest insects on your plants, but is neem oil for aphids bad for other beneficial insects? I can tell you
In
neem oil worked great on I had some black fungus gnats in some of my houseplants and it worked great for those.
Yeah, in a houseplant setting, that's probably a great choice because you don't, that's a very controlled setting, and you do have live organisms in houseplant soil too, but it's not the same as being outside, and we're not, you typically don't have like predatory insects. You don't have lady beetles and stuff in your house typically. Some people get them in their walls, but that's another story. Neem oil, any kind of oil. If I were to take the, olive oil I got in the kitchen and spray it on some eggs of a lady beetle, it would kill them. So it smothers them. So if I sprayed on the lady beetle itself, it probably may kill it. It's certainly going to harm it. Any kind of oil, any kind of soap, both of those are really common and non-toxic pesticides that are okay for us and safer for our pets, but they are still deadly to beneficial insects. So, and neem oil fresh on bees, it can be very deadly. They take it back to, especially honeybees, they take it back to the hive or a bumblebee. And it can kill the whole thing. So you have to be careful. Just, target carefully, know what those eggs should look like for your beneficials. Don't spray if you see them, and don't spray that area in particular. Neem is kind of absorbs into the plant. So once it's dry and into the plant, you don't need to worry about it very much. That's the beauty of it. And it actually can work as a fungicide as well as an insecticide.
Excellent. If anyone has any more questions, we can stay on for a couple minutes. If we see you drop off, we'll take that as a cue that you're done for the evening. If anyone was wanting to follow along, it looks like the Broncos finally scored in the fourth quarter, but it wasn't enough. Chiefs won 19-8, which we probably knew they would. Any other tidbits you want to share? Do you want to give a quick preview of what's happening at this Saturday's class?
Oh, yeah. So Saturday, we're going to talk more about native plants and sort of the plethora of beautiful native plants that are out in the world. Even, going beyond just the obvious like sword ferns and, the things I mentioned, and even those beautiful deciduous shrubs that I'm always like, pushing on people because I think they're such cool plants. There's a whole array of, ferns and ground covers and ephemeral plants and little perennials and woodland, forbs and fun flowering meadowscaping plants, some of which we will be using. So we're going to create container gardens that you can take home. And, they'll look a little sparse right now because it's newly planted, but they will fill in with these beautiful little native plants. And it gives you a perspective of what they look like and how they grow. And you'll have this little container garden to take home with you. So that's super fun.
And just because we have a few minutes and I loved learning this technique, but can you talk about the tuna can test for watering?
Oh, for watering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a tuna can, basically, if you're looking to put an inch of water out on a lawn in a week's time, and usually it's used in a lawn setting to do this, but it basically will, a tuna can is the right size. It's, if the height is the right size to show you when an inch fills up, and it tells you how long you have to water. So you basically are testing your sprinkler. And, the nice thing about that is you can test it at different strengths, so to speak. Like you can have the sprinkler up really high and see, if sometimes when it's up real high, the water streams are further apart, or you lose some, to evaporation or to wind. Try it at different times of day. But basically you're trying to see how long it takes to get to an inch of water. in that can. And then you need to water with whatever pressure you decided to put your sprinkler on for that period of time on that piece that you measured. And different sprinklers have different spray patterns. So, that may mean you're only doing half the lawn. Maybe it takes you 15 minutes to get there, and then you have to move it and do another 15. So you have to keep all that in mind, but it's such a super easy way to figure out how much to water.
And then if anyone's interested in some of the resources, when Laura was talking about capturing the rain with rain barrels or rain gardens, whether you're in King or Snohomish County in Bothell, both of our conservation districts have some excellent resources for helping connect you to, if you want to install a rain barrel, they can come out and help you do that. If you want to plant a rain garden and don't know where to start, they can help you with that. That's what they're there for, is helping you, conserve resources on your own property. So we've got those all listed on the resource page for this class and natural yard care program in general. But if you have any questions, I'm sure everyone is sick of getting emails from me, reminders, but please feel free to contact me with any questions.
Yeah, the conservation districts are wonderful services to the community, and those plant sales are just amazing, that they have in the spring. I've shot both of them over the years. I'm not sure that I like one more than the other. They're different, but yeah, I've gotten my share of plants from both.
When does Tilth do its plant sales?
Oh yeah, so we have a plant sale coming. I think it's May 17th. It's whatever that middle Saturday is of this coming year. So, or March 17th. So that's our first one. We used to, in the old days, only did the May sale, and then we added a March sale for some time, and then we took that away for a while. Last year we brought it back. One of the reasons we brought it back is we want to be able to have people get the right plants at the right time of year. So right plant, right time, right place. So we're selling onions, cabbage, kale, broccoli, lettuces, things that love cool season and can tolerate cooler soils in March, mid-March. And that's in the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetland site in Rainier Beach in Southeast Seattle. And then the May sale will be again at the Wallingford site where our main office is, at the Good Shepherd Center. And that's the first weekend of May, whatever those dates are. We have an early bird sale Friday night, and then Saturday, Sunday is the main sale. Super exciting, super fun. Even if you don't want to buy a whole bunch of stuff, it's just especially that May sale, there's so many cool plants. And we have a huge pollinator section, which includes a lot of native pollinators that we buy from Oxbow Farm to sell. So nice choices.
All right. I think we're ready to call it a night. Thank you. I see 3 people still with us. Thank you for sticking with us until the end. We will again post the slides from this presentation as well as the video recording on the resource page for this website by probably early next week. So I'll send an email once I have that posted. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.